Dear listeners, let us know if we should keep the new intro, or go back to the old one, or change the new one by adding the old voice opening. Also, don't forget to drop a hi in the comments section. Your suggestions are welcome. Now let's start the story. The door opened and in stepped Amy Scaglietti, unusually late, tired and craving a good night's sleep. In fact, she was so tired that leaning against the cold door after locking it, she found that its cool surface was absorbing her stress. But she turned around and walked into the room. A sudden chill swept over her as she heard a slight movement behind her. Turning around, she saw a figure she recognized. Relieved as though she was, their abrupt presence, at midnight, was a bit unnerving. "Hey, what are you doing here?" she asked, but the intruder seemed to be at war within. They said nothing. "Are you all right?" said Miss Scaglietti, but all they did was raise their hand, and in it, a gun. The body of Amy Scaglietti was found in her house in the early hours of this morning. She was found by her friend, Sarah Burnley, around 6:30 a.m., and it is believed that she was killed between 11:45 and 12:15 last night, said the chief of police. "How safe are the good people of London with this killer shooting people in their own homes?" asked the reporter. "Well, as far as know, this seems to be an isolated incident, so it is my belief that this killer will not attack anyone at random, but I do urge the people to exercise some caution." How will the police respond to this? "We were willing to dispatch the Interpol's finest detectives to apprehend the perpetrator. Unfortunately, they are all currently occupied in another pressing matter," said the chief. "Nevertheless, we still have two fine young detectives that will not relent until this murder is solved." The reporter, understanding that this was all the chief was saying, merged with the crowd. While the chief absent-mindedly walked around the scene lost in thought, his deputy dragged him back to reality. "Are you sure about this, sir? They may be blithering idiots, but I really don't have a choice, do I, Giles?" retorted the chief. "If I let this one go, the press is going to give us some serious trouble." Meanwhile, Matt woke up to his usual morning scenery. Across the room, which takes a metamorphosis when looked at from afar, sleeping, one arm dangling at the side of his bed, lay Chuck, lost in a blissful neverland. Still drowsy from waking up, Matt looked at his watch. "Oh, 6 o'clock, he exclaimed and called out for Chuck, who merely gave a grunt in response. Matt threw himself out of bed and into the bathroom, attempting to wash away the weariness of the night, and to get himself ready for another monotonous day at the department, for he and Chuck worked in the Interpol. They were both considerably new recruits, so they hadn't seen much action yet, and were never appointed to anything even remotely interesting. Little did they know that all that was about to change. After a nice cold shower, he felt wide awake and stepped out of the bathroom and found Chuck still sleeping. He took a deep breath. "Oi, wake up," he yelled. The sudden sound woke him up with a start and fell off the bed. "Huh, where am I?" said Chuck, and realizing what had happened, "Oh." He got up slowly, almost sloth-like, and an indifferent grunt indicated he was going to the bathroom. A half-hour later, both of them were dressed and ready. Matt, in a black shirt, white belt and black pants, his untidy hair falling to his eyes and swept right, and standing up at the back. Chuck in a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. His glasses were a little lopsided, and his hair had styled off its own accord. The phone rang and Matt answered. The chief spoke on the other end. "Boys, I have a crime scene I need you to be at, so drag your butts out of bed and get there on the double." And the ever-eager Matt replied, "Yes, sir," overstressing the point by repeating what he had just said several times with different phraseology, which annoyed the chief, who sighed and hung up. "Who was that?" asked Chuck. "That, my friend, was the call we've been waiting for," said Matt, being his usual self and over-dramatizing the sentence, and moving his head in a slow nod as he spoke. "Anna called," said Chuck, looking hopeful. "What?" "No, she's not calling back, man," said Matt, exasperated. "That was the chief. Said he had an assignment for us. Let's go." Then he reached for the door and turned back over to Chuck. "Oh, Anna, by the way, your t-shirt's inside out." The doors of the late Amy Scaglietti's apartment burst open, and in stepped Matt and Chuck. "Interpol. Freeze!" they shouted, in unison. But apart from the body, which had not been moved, they were alone. They looked at each other and shrugged. "Okay," they said, quite unconcerned by the fact that their attempt at a grand and exiting entrance hadn't really worked out. Matt looked at his watch. 1 o'clock, lunch break, he theorized. "Oh, right. That explains why the room's empty. Thanks for that, Captain Obvious." "Sure thing," said Chuck, quite pleased with himself. He then turned around to walk out of the room but was caught in the arm by Matt. "Where do you think you're going?" asked Matt. "Well, it is lunch break, so." "Oh, no, you don't," said Matt, sounding quite stern. This is our first homicide, and we got to do this by the book. We mess up, and it's all over. So why can't we just have lunch and then solve a murder? This is our big break. Chuck, began Matt, over-dramatizing. Do you really want to throw away our future, the future of the department, or even the world as we know it, just for a little lunch? Okay, aren't you being a little bit over-dramatic here? Oh, come on, man. Just forget the lunch. Irritated though he was, Chuck gave in. They moved in close to the body, and Chuck bent down to examine it closely while Matt looked around the room intently for clues. Oh, what is it? What did you find? Asked Matt, eagerly. She's dead. What? Of course she's dead, said Matt, impatiently. That's why we're here. I am just saying. Deciding it would be prudent to take matters into his own hands, Matt, too, bent down to examine her body for himself. And then he lingered on the gunshot wound, which was a tad inaccurate. Look at this, said Matt. The bullet hit about 1.5 inches away from the center of the head, which means if the killer was standing at the door, it wouldn't have been hard to take this shot, even if he wasn't an expert. Exactly, agreed Matt, intrigued. Looking around the room, not too much blood splattered either. I wonder why that is. Matt ignored this last comment and continued to look around and did a double take. He leapt off the floor and picked up the object that had caught his eye. A lipstick. What's that? Asked Chuck. I never thought I'd see one in my life, said Matt, captivated by the small roll. This is Le Baiser de la Mort, number 22. I don't know what you've been smoking, man, said Chuck, amused by Matt's fascination over beauty product. But that's just a roll of lipstick. Oh, for God's sake, retorted Matt. Haven't you ever read Jean-Pierre's Lipstick District magazine? Chuck looked absolutely aghast that his best friend ever suggested something as horrible as that. So Matt began to explain. This is a very rare piecework. It's not mass-produced anymore due to the considerable government regulations on the stuff after the lipstick incident in 2006. The stuff's been banned from sales in the market. But the point is, some companies still produce them secretly, and it can be found if you know where to look. It is, and he paused for the effect, the marijuana of cosmetics. Oh my God, said Chuck, pausing at every word. You read cosmetics magazines? Matt, who had been caught off guard, stammered for a second. No, he said airily. Chuck gave him a searching look. It's a guilty pleasure, all right, snapped Matt, annoyed at Chuck's nosiness. But Matt suddenly looked solid. Oi, you okay? Inquired Chuck. Yeah, I am fine, said Matt, distantly. It just occurred to me. You know how I am a big fan of Scaglietti? Yeah, I've seen you go wee yourself when she's on TV, said Chuck indifferently. I don't wee myself, said Matt defensively. It's just a reflex. I've known her for a long time, but I have never seen her with any kind of makeup. Let me just check something. And with that, he left the room and came back moments later. In his hands, a small box. Chuck looked bored, and Matt, who had expected nothing more from him, wasn't bothered. All right, this stuff is Scaglietti's beauty supplies, said Matt. A bit low-end, I'd say. Doesn't quite add up, does it? Yeah, it does seem fishy, replied Chuck, playing with his ear, a sign of him being thoughtful. So what? Do you think our guy dropped this? I am not entirely sure, but I got a feeling. Let's get this down to the lab, said Matt. I think we can get some DNA off of this. It's been used. Makes sense to me, said Chuck, regaining his indifferent composure. Come on, let's go, said Matt, looking at Scaglietti's lifeless form on the floor with her right arm beneath her back, an expression of fear mixed with dislike on his face. Dead people make me feel weird. Okay, said Matt. I've sent the lipstick to be tested for DNA. It should give us something soon. Great, said Chuck. They were in a small room which they had chosen to be their evidence room. It seems that our victim was quite the media celebrity. Tell me something I don't know. How about this then, said Chuck. She also provided critical information that got some big players into prison. Now that's interesting. What does the ballistics report say? Matt read an extract from the report. It says here that the bullet that killed Amy was a .45 caliber. That's not very helpful considering how easy it is to get one's hand on one of those, said Chuck, doing a background check on Scaglietti. Sometime later, Chuck had found an item that was particularly interesting and decided to share it with Matt. Okay, I got something. What? Asked Matt, concentrating his gaze at Chuck. Miss Scaglietti had a friend named Sarah Burnley who she frequently visited and went out with. Let me see that. And he took the paper Chuck was reading. Seems like they were very close. Yeah, and also, she had a maid who did all her chores. Yet another suspect, said Matt. Here's something else. He indicated to the autopsy report he was holding. Autopsy report says that she was shot in the left hemisphere of the frontal lobe of the cerebrum, missing the hypothalamus by about an inch at a 75 angle from the lower center of the anterior cranial region at the bridge of the nasal cavity. "And you assume I know what all that means," said Chuck in a "you don't know me at all, do you?" fashion. "It means she was shot in the head, you blithering idiot." "Oh, dragging it," said he, smiling. "Okay." "Also," read Matt, "little to no bleeding would be expected as the bullet was lodged into the wound, preventing much loss of blood." "Well, that answers my question." Chuck looked at Matt happily. The two of them discussed the evidence. The conversation grew steadily animated, until at last Matt pulled out his mobile phone. "I am calling my lipstick guy." "Hello, mate. It's me, Matt." He spoke to the other person as soon as he'd answered the call. "I have to ask you for a favor." Knowing his friend, he took the silence as the green light. "I need you to check out this particular lipstick and get me some details on it," said Matt. "Yeah, it's a Jean-Pierre." "Okay, thanks," said Matt, as the person at the other end accepted the task and he hung up. Chuck, who had been looking dumbstruck throughout the small conversation, spoke at last. "You have a lipstick guy?" asked Chuck in a small voice. "Yeah," replied Matt airily, bobbing his head. "That's still not much to work with, though. I say we go see the victim's friend, Sarah Burnley. Maybe she can give us something." Chuck agreed, and the pair exited the room. They arrived at Ms. Burnley's apartment. A healthy brown door stood in front of them. Matt knocked, and a few seconds later, Ms. Burnley opened door and inquired the identity of the two strangers before her. Matt and Chuck coolly showed her their badges. "Good morning, Ms. Burnley," greeted Matt. "We're from the Interpol, and we would like to ask you a few questions." "How do I know that you are really who you say you are?" demanded Ms. Burnley, not impolitely. The two detectives showed her the tag on the badges. Real. This seemed to be enough for her, and she invited them into a spacious living room, furbished handsomely. Ms. Burnley, quite sadly, after they were seated, spoke. "I still can't believe she's gone." Chuck, who had brought a writing pad along, audibly noted, "Can't believe she's gone." Matt fired Chuck a glare, then looked back at Ms. Burnley, kindly. "We understand your plight, Ms. Burnley, and we know how hard this is going to be for you. But we want you to try and answer a few questions about Ms. Scaglietti for us, okay?" "Okay," she said. Her voice cracked halfway, but she swallowed and spoke much more clearly. "I think I can do that." "Great," said Matt. "So, when was the last time you saw Ms. Scaglietti?" "She was here the morning before she broke off." "Died?" completed Chuck, tactlessly to Ms. Burnley, who nodded. "At Burnley's home 3 days ago," he wrote. Matt looked at Chuck as if he were something appalling. "At that time, did she look agitated or upset about something?" inquired Matt. "Not that I could see," replied Ms. Burnley. "I mean, she was always a little frustrated about her work, but nothing out of the ordinary." Chuck made another note. "Nothing unusual except for usual jitters." "Would you please stop that?" shot Matt, frustrated with Chuck's indifference. "Right, sorry," he said, finally feeling the room. "Did she have any enemies?" wondered Matt. "She helped bust about many high-ranking criminals and reported all sorts of scandals and whatnot. I think she would have had a few, yeah. Several enemies," said Chuck, but this time, Matt ignored him. "Can you tell us anything else that might help?" "Anything at all?" asked Matt. "Well," she thought for a moment. "I can tell that she was working on something before her, you know, but I don't know if it'll be of any help." "Even the smallest detail can be of great help," encouraged Matt. "She was working on a case in Citibank." Chuck looked up at Ms. Burnley. "The one in Wall Street?" "That's the Big Apple," said Matt. "Oh no," corrected Ms. Burnley. "The small one in London? Do you know what the story was about?" asked Matt. "I am sorry, I don't know." "Righto then, next stop, Citibank," said Chuck and added, "the small one." They stood up and walked over to the door, but Matt turned around to face Ms. Burnley again and asked her to notify them if she remembers anything more. Anything that might help them. "All right, I will," she said, smiling goodbye. "Thank you, Ms. Burnley. Goodbye." Once they had located the Citibank office in London, they asked for an audience with the manager. The receptionist ushered them to a small room with an imposing desk. On it stood proudly a plaque that read, "Mr. Jerry Oswald, manager." They waited in their seats, which were quite comfortable in Matt's opinion, for quite some time before the manager arrived. One side of the room was entirely glass, overlooking the road. It was painted white, and the mahogany desk took up at least half the room. A filing cabinet stood against the right wall, just behind the desk. A fish tank bubbled enchantingly next to Matt, on his right-hand side, and he peered in to examine the beautiful gold fish drifting in the water, floating in and out of the magnificent, artificial underwater landscape. He had always been fascinated by fish, and he loved watching them. "Magnificent, isn't she?" said a voice that shook Matt out of his trance. "Hello," said Matt, turning his attention towards the speaker, who was now walking over to his desk. "Hello?" sniggered Chuck. "Well, you have to start with hello," said Matt, matter-of-factly, and he looked at Mr. Oswald. He was in his late 30s and looked very impressive, and somehow Matt got the feeling that he was a man who always got his way. "Now," said he, in the same cold voice with which he had spoke before, "how can I help you?" "Yes," said Matt, returning to what he was saying before Chuck had interrupted him. "We're from the Interpol." "So I see," said the manager flatly. "And we would like to ask you if there has been any unusual activity here," Chuck cutting him. "No, not really," said he. "What do you mean?" asked Matt, leaning forwards. "Well," he began, "there was a hidden camera that was discovered just 2 days ago." "Really?" said Chuck. "Yes, you see we were having a CCTV upgrade and it was found in this room. Right there." Mr. Oswald was pointing at a place where the wall met the ceiling in a corner right behind him. They looked at it. "Go on," urged Matt. "Our janitor then came to me and said that he'd seen the camera once, when he was cleaning," he continued, "exactly a week ago, but he assumed it was part of the CCTV upgrade. Here it is. You can find that it has only been recording since 4 days ago." "Was there anything else unusual?" asked Matt. "No," said the manager, "just this." Matt wasn't convinced. "Are you sure?" "Yes," said the manager, "but, quite frankly, this kind of thing happens often, and between you and me, the people around here aren't exactly the brightest bulbs in town, so they get a real kick out of dim-witted things like this." Chuck giggled. "I catch your drift." But Matt's suspicions about the man not being entirely truthful weren't put at ease, and as he continued to talk with Mr. Oswald, he realized that he wasn't about to let out any more information. It wasn't right. By his powers of deduction, the manager was avoiding his questions. This was going nowhere, so he decided to wrap it up. "Well, thank you for your cooperation. Anything unusual, and you know where to find us, yeah?" "Good day," said the manager. "See you," replied Chuck. As they walked out of the building, Chuck was talking fervently about how he had thought the manager was hiding something, and then an idea struck Matt which changed his expression to sheer smugness. He was just about to explain it to Chuck when, "I know that look anywhere," said Chuck, smiling with a raised eyebrow. "You need a coffee?" "No, UID, began Matt, but now that he had mentioned it, "Okay, you're right. I do need a coffee." They had a nice little coffee break and returned to where they had been standing just before they engaged their coffee break. Chuck had a problem with this. "Okay, so we had coffee, but why did we have to come back to the bank?" asked Chuck. "Shouldn't we be headed for the evidence room?" Matt raised his finger to explain, deliberated for a second, and upon realizing the stupidity in coming back to the same spot, they zipped to the evidence room. "Right," began Matt, sitting cross-legged on a desk, a very comfortable position for brainstorming. "So that camera is one of those smart cams which are really expensive and not to mention really stylish." Matt finished with an impressed nod, and, he continued, "only a professional would have been able to afford one." "But the manager said that this sort of thing happens all the time," said Chuck. "I don't think so. Leastways not this one," said Matt, thoughtfully. "This is too good to be used by an amateur. Did you notice the place it was fitted? What about it?" Its angle offered an unobstructed view of the entire office, but primarily pointing at the filing cabinet. "Really?" "Yes. And there's another thing. The janitor said that he'd seen the camera 7 days ago, but camera was removed from its hiding place only 2 days ago. So there should be a total of 5 days worth of video, right? But there's only 2 days of footage. What happened to the other 3 days of film?" Chuck appeared to be lost in thought, apparently on the edge of a brainwave. A rare occasion. Considering the fact that this is an old model, he reasoned, it only supports memory cards up to 100 gigabytes. And that gives about, he counted his fingers, 72 hours of video in HD 720p, which is the recorded quality here. 72 hours is 3 days. "So the memory card's been replaced?" asked Matt. Chuck nodded. "We need to find that one because I don't think there's anything unusual about this footage, or the manager wouldn't have given it to us." "How do we find it?" he said, exhaling. A moment's pause was followed by Chuck screaming his head off. "Dude, I just had a brainwave," said Chuck impatiently, "and I am gonna bet my hair that this," he motioned to the camera, "belonged to Scaglietti." "It's certainly a possibility," said Matt. "We do know from Ms. Burnley that she was working on Citibank. Whatever was, or is, in that memory card is imperative to solve this case." Then I am willing to bet my hair again that Citibank is hiding something from us. Yeah, me too, said Matt, looking out the window. Let me just make a call to a guy who knows a guy and get some dirt on Citibank, he continued. It might take a while though. How long? 3 days. We don't have that kind of time, cried Matt, getting ready to dramatize the whole situation. The fate of the good people of this city rests in our hands now, Chuck, said he, putting a hand over to Chuck's shoulder. We can't let this killer strike fear into their innocent hearts, finished Matt, bringing his clenched fist to his chest, eyes closed and head bowed. You're doing that overly dramatic thing again, said Chuck, unconcerned. Can you get it done any sooner? Asked Matt, coming out of his little bubble. All right, said Chuck, manifesting displeasure at the thought of physical labor. I'll try, but no guarantees. Just as he finished, Matt's phone rang. Hello, answered Matt. Yeah, that's the one. Hey, that's great. We'll be there in 10. He ended the call. That was my lipstick guy, said Matt proudly. And he's got some information we could use. Still can't believe that you have a lipstick guy, muttered Chuck, but all the same, making sure Matt could hear what he was saying. I mean, of all the things, lipstick. Would you just get over it? Retorted Matt. Okay, all right. Let's go see your lipstick guy, jeered Chuck. Their rendezvous was a secluded dark alleyway in the heart of London. Matt was leaning against the graffiti-covered wall next to a dumpster. Chuck was sitting against it, checking his Facebook notifications. He humored himself by saying that he was down in the dumps today. A dark hooded figure approached them, his face hidden under the hood. He approached Matt and adjusted it so that Matt could see his face. Chuck stood up and joined Matt and the mysterious person. Matt reached out an arm and performed a very long and complicated handshake. Chuck's eyes grew tired trying to follow the swift movement. Finally, Matt spoke. He introduced his friend to Lipstick, as he called him. Matt explained that Lipstick was an undercover agent that he had had the good fortune to befriend. According to him, Lipstick had been assigned to the task of getting to know the black market activities so that the police can keep an eye on it. But they wouldn't act until something very serious happens by fear of blowing their cover. However, the fabled king had become very fond of Lipstick and had taken him up as his right-hand man, for he was reliable and effective. This made Lipstick, literally, the information cache. So, Lipstick, what have you got for us? Asked Matt. Okay, said Lipstick. He spoke for the first time since they had seen him. Toughness radiated from him as he spoke. So what I can tell you is that since the government put up strict restrictions on exotic lipstick use and possession, the stuff's virtually disappeared, but a few companies still secretly make some of this stuff and release it into the black market. Jean-Pierre's been doing it for years. The sample you showed me, he pointed a gloved hand at Matt, is impossibly rare and is worth a lot of money. So why would anyone just drop it then? Asked Chuck, turning his head to look at Matt. Well, this is an interesting turn of events, said Matt, scratching his chin. I can't imagine why someone would drop it, said Lipstick. But the only people I know who have this particular one are right here on this list. But hey, some of these people may not actually be alive. And remember, you've never seen me. I gotta go. They'll start wondering where I am. Good luck, mate. And with that, he disappeared into the shadows. Oh, you were right, Matt. Scaglietti's not on this list, said Chuck, scanning the list. But look who is. Matt read the name he was so eagerly pointing out. Rachel Grant. He exhaled, tilting his head to one side. Looks like it's your lucky day, Chuck, said he. We actually have to look for her. Chuck smiled to himself. Chuck entered their room after having a curiously long bath, well-dressed, and found Matt lying on his bed, ready and whistling the theme from Pirates of the Caribbean. Matt looked up at Chuck, who he had known never to dress even remotely nicely, and raised an eyebrow. What are you wearing? Said he, perplexed. Nothing. Oh, you mean this? He pointed at his Armani t-shirt and jeans. I just thought it'd be fun to look a little nice, that's all. But you never dress this nicely. Well, there's a first time for everything, said Chuck, airily. Sure there is, said Matt, smiling sarcastically. Who are you, and what have you done with Chuck? Would you just drop it? Said Chuck impatiently. We have work to do. I am a detective, you know, said Matt, concerned. And if this is about Rachel, then I say it's a lost cause, mate. This isn't about Rachel, okay? Clearly annoyed at Matt's persistence, he walked out of the room. They pulled up in front of McDonald's and Matt's Renault Megane. She should be here, said Chuck. She usually has lunch here. How do you know? Asked Matt. But then he realized that Chuck had been stalking her. Have you been stalking her? What? No. Get out of town, said Chuck, airily and peering out the window, and he spotted her sharing a table with someone while Matt muttered something that sounded like monkey feathers. There she is, exclaimed Chuck. How do I look? Focus, man, focus, said Matt, getting out of the car. The stranger left just as they approached the front door, but not before Matt had noticed her sleek hair bouncing in the air as she strode off. All right, I got this, said Chuck, puffing out his chest. What are you, crazy? No, you'll just be drooling all over her. Going all doe-eyed, laughed Matt. Come on, man, pleaded Chuck. Have a bit of faith in your best friend. All right, said Matt, realizing Chuck had hit his soft spot. I'm gonna sit out back and keep an eye on you. Here, take this. It's a microphone. Let me hear everything you say. Okay, I am going in, said Chuck, picking up the miniature microphone. Do I look all right? Not overdressed, am I? This is an interrogation, not a date, said Matt, though he adjusted Chuck's t-shirt. Stay focused, he said, patting Chuck's cheek. Right, I gotcha. What are the consequences of what I've just done? Thought Matt, as he walked over to find a good vantage point. He found a place that suited his requirements, sat down and ordered a smoothie. He heard the familiar voice of Chuck through his earphone and looked up to see him exchanging pleasantries with Rachel. Well, he was at least, and he prayed that Chuck remained focused. Hello, Rachel, said Chuck, pulling up a chair. Well, if it isn't Chuck Spaulding, she said. It's been quite a while, hasn't it? Yes, it has, said Chuck, who was now staring intently at Rachel as though seeing her properly for the first time in his life. Rachel looked completely relaxed, and then he spoke. You know, I was stuck in a filthy, stinking cell for 3 days because of what you did, squeaked Chuck. Damn it, Chuck. I knew you couldn't do it, exclaimed Matt, dropping his head. Oh, come now, Chuckles, said Rachel, tauntingly, still holding a grudge for something like that? Chuckles. Matt was fighting back a fit of laughter. Oh my God, I am so not gonna let this one go. Don't call me that, said Chuck, and he continued complaining. It was 3 days, showing his fingers, and the cell stank of pee and it was dirty and had bugs and— Why are you here, Chuck? Demanded Rachel. You see, somewhat regaining his composure, I am in law enforcement now. That's it, man. Stay on track, thought Matt, his hands together and watching his partner's every move like a hawk closing in for the kill. And Chuck shows his badge, or at least he thought he did, because what he showed was an expired coupon for a free meal at McDonald's. Matt facepalmed. Right, she said, sarcastically raising her eyebrow. How's that working out for you? Chuck realized the mistake and found the badge that he had meant to show. Teasingly, in an innocent voice, she asked him, Have you come here to arrest me, officer? As much as I would love to do that, no, said Chuck. I just want to ask you a few questions and hopefully, depending on how you answer, I will arrest you. That's what I love about you, Chuck. You're such a laugh, giggled Rachel. All right then, ask away. Let's start with where you were at around 12:30 p.m., 3 days ago. Why, I believe I was in Rosewood near Camden Beach in America, having tea with my grandfather. I think you remember him, don't you? Sneered Rachel. Do I remember him? Twitched Chuck. A chill had swept over him at the mention of her grandfather. The maniacal old man, a war veteran, had tried to kill Chuck, thinking he'd poisoned his afternoon tea. You there, boy, Chad, said Rachel's grandfather, in a tough American accent which made him all the more frightening. Bring me my afternoon tea? But, began Chuck. Now, screamed the old man with such a force that Chuck was moving before his mind had registered what he was doing. A terrified Chuck returned with the tea and shaking hands. Her grandfather had accepted the cup without even giving him a nod of thank you. But seeing the tea bag, immediately jumped to the conclusion of attempted murder and wrapped his skinny but immensely powerful fingers around Chuck's throat, squeezing the air out of him. He'd woken up half an hour later with high fever. Dragging himself back to the present, he said, I didn't come here to talk about the past. Well, technically I did, because this event I intend to question you about happened 3 days ago, but it's not the distant past, so get to the point, Chuckles, dear, interrupted Rachel, slightly irritated. I have better places to be, you know. Okay, I told you not to call me that. Were you at Amy Scaglietti's house on the 14th around 12:30 p.m.? I told you, love, I was in Rosewood. Yeah, sure you were. And are you familiar with— He broke off to look at the name written in his palm. Jean-Pierre's Le Baiser de la Mort, number 22 lipstick. It's pretty rare and expensive. In fact, only a few people actually know how to get this stuff. Rachel's smile faded momentarily, but she regained control almost instantly, but not before Matt had noticed from afar. Well, you know how much I like rare and expensive things, she said, sweetly. But Chuck had noticed too that she had instantaneously lost her footing and interrupted her. Well, this particular one was found at the scene of the crime. said Chuck, staring piercingly into Rachel's eyes that were now explicitly trying to evade him. She deliberated and then spoke as though she were confessing. Chuck's legendary piercing stare had worked. "Okay, look," she began. "That was mine before, but it wasn't in my possession. The truth is I gave it to one of my clients as a gift 2 months ago. She was sort of a friend, but come 2 weeks later and not a peep from her. I tried to reach her, but she's gone, disappeared into thin air. I can tell you the name of the girl, though," she added. "Her name is Alice Longworth, but I must say she's terribly difficult to find." "Alice Longworth?" wondered Matt, who had been hanging on every word Rachel was speaking. "I am a good detective, you know," said Chuck, leaning against the backrest of his chair. "All evidence to the contrary," said Matt, amused at what Chuck was saying, reminiscing all the times Chuck had screwed up. "So I am going to need a DNA sample to confirm that," said Chuck. "Oh, I think I've given you enough of those, remember," said Rachel, pouting her lips. Chuck spit takes, but she plucked a single strand of hair and handed it over to Chuck after he'd finished drying himself and his immediate environment amongst the innumerable. "I am so sorry." He placed the hair safely in a plastic bag when Rachel spoke again. "How's it been, Chuck? Met anyone since you and I?" "As a matter of fact, I have. Lots of people," said Chuck airily. "More than I can count. In fact, I am in a relationship right now." "He's talking about the coffee shop girl he says hi to every morning," said Matt, rolling his eyes. "Really?" said Rachel. "What's her name?" "Her name? Her name is, it's Anna," he stammered. "Yeah, that's right, it's Anna." "Sure it is. So what does she do?" "She works in a coffee shop." "Told ya," said Matt, resisting a terrible urge to burst out laughing. Rachel took a good look at Chuck. For a second there, Matt thought he saw a tinge of sorrow, but it vanished as soon as it had appeared. "Well, look at the time," said Rachel, checking her watch. "I'd love to stay and chat, but I have places to go, things to do." "This isn't over," warned Chuck. "I know you got something to do with this." "Goodbye, Chuck," said she, in a final tone, leaving Chuck staring at his drink. "Don't say a word," he said as Matt took up the seat Rachel vacated. "I ain't got nothing to say." "Chuckles," said Matt, repressing a laugh. "Damn it, Matt. If you don't shut up, or so help me I am gonna." "All right, man, chill. It's not that funny," said Matt, dishonestly. "Who else is on the list?" asked Chuck, changing the subject. "Well, get this. Out of the 9 people mentioned here, 3 are dead, of more or less natural causes, and the others are in prison, except for one, and you won't believe who it is." "Gwen Stefani?" "Nope," said Matt, putting on a mysterious hat that had definitely not been there till just then, imitating Indiana Burnley. "Sarah Burnley," said he in a whisper, from under the hat, his eyes hidden from view. "Whoa!" exclaimed Chuck. "Where'd you get the hat?" staring bewildered at the fedora. "Please," smiled Matt, removing his fedora. "It's Sarah Burnley. Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle." Looks like this story just got a bit more interesting. So what do you say we visit our friend and get to the bottom of this confusing dilemma? Yes, let's. Oh, and give me the DNA sample, and I'll have it sent down to the lab. Okay, here. Gwen Stefani's rich girl played through Chuck's phone. Matt shot him a quizzical look which Chuck shrugged off. "Hello? Yeah, okay. I'll be there." "Who was that?" "That there was my informant. Sarah will have to wait, let's go." "So who exactly is this informant?" They were walking down a small gravel lane where Chuck had arranged to meet up with his informant. There were small houses on either side, cozy little cottages that created the impression of a village. It was a pleasant location. Matt could hear children playing in their homes and gardens. As they took a turn, however, the environment grew gloomy. Matt was surprised that it was so dark in the dead afternoon. "I don't know her real name. She's way too careful to let that one go," said Chuck. "But on the street, they call her Telltale Gale." "Why do they call her that?" "'Cause they say that she can get you information about anyone," said Chuck. "I once heard this rumor that she got dirt on the president for $50 million. Can't say for sure if it's true, though." "How do you meet people like this anyway?" asked Matt. "Facebook, duh." "Figures," said Matt. He did not like this setting. It reminded him of the forest in The Wizard of Oz. Shaking his head, he asked, "Are you sure we are supposed to meet here?" "Yeah, this is the place." He scratched his head. "Or maybe it was over here." They turned around, searching for the source of the voice. "Over here." Again, they turned around, but despite their efforts, neither of them could see anyone beside themselves. "Over here." Desperate to find the person trying to get their attention, they looked around intently, but luck had abandoned them. "I am over here, you pair of quarterwits." Matt saw the informant looking at them, quite plainly through a window, staring at them with an air of amused irritation etched on her face as they walked over to her window. "Oh, okay," they said in unison. "Did you get what I asked?" "Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't." "What if I said it means you're gonna earn a few bucks?" said Chuck, waving 20 bucks. "That's a 20, she said, clearly offended. "Nobody's gonna do anything for you for 20. All right, fine. How about this?" Chuck pulled out 100. "I'd say that's gonna be enough to pay for coffee in the shop down the street," said Telltale Gale crossly. "Ladies, please," said Matt coolly. He showed a 1,000 note, while Chuck shot him a murderous look for calling him a lady. "Now that there is worth some good information, let's go talk someplace more private, shall we?" The trio relocated to a smoothie bar. "When I said private, this isn't exactly what I had in mind," said she, looking around the crowded room. Matt shrugged and continued to drink his smoothie. "All right, so what can I do for you boys?" "You can give us any and all info on the most recent happenings of Citibank," said Chuck. "The one in New York City?" "Why?" said Gail, clearly confused. "No," said Matt, looking at the ceiling, "the small one in London." "Oh, I can't tell you that it's been robbed a few days ago," she said after a few seconds' pause. "A file was stolen." "What kind of file?" asked Chuck. "As you may know, Citibank extends its services to a select group of individuals who specialize in breaking the law." "Yes, but we can't prove it," said Chuck. "So what's that got to do with this?" "Everything." "What's so significant about this file?" asked Matt. "That's just it," said Gail, waving her hand. "Nothing. It was one about a small-time crook." "Who?" said Chuck, sipping his mango marvel. "Nobody knows," whispered Gail eerily. "Nobody cares." "Then why would someone steal it?" said Matt. "Dunno. Blackmail?" She shrugged. "But as I said, it wasn't one of the big players." "Then this was a personal attack," theorized Chuck, snapping his fingers. "So basically from what you're saying, it could be anybody?" "That's pretty much the sum of it, Matt." "Spectacular," said Chuck, crossly. "Got anything else? Maybe something we could actually use?" "I don't really remember," said she, screwing up her face. "Of course you don't," grudgingly handing over another 1,000. "How about now?" "Ah, it's all coming back to me now," she said, pocketing the money. "So, what is it?" "I can tell you that Amy Scaglietti was hot on the thief's trail when she was killed, and I gotta tell you Miss Scaglietti was one for caution, and she was damn good at hiding things. I wouldn't be surprised if she's left a trail of breadcrumbs for you to follow." "I paid 1,000 for that," cried Chuck. "Take or leave it, but no refunds." Matt and Chuck looked at each other, but when they looked back, she was gone. "How do they do that?" said Matt, impressed. "I have no idea, so what now?" "I dunno about you, but I want a smoothie. I'll take a lime with Sprite and he'll have a mango marvel." "You got it," said the waiter. A few minutes later, he returned with their drinks. Matt quickly took a huge gulp, which seemed to have refreshed him graciously. "A smoothie really hits the spot during an investigation." "At Chuck?" "Hell yeah." "So how's your grandma?" "Oh, she's okay," said Chuck, taking another swig. "Turns out she wasn't having a heart attack at all." "Yeah? What happened then?" "Indigestion." "Does stupidity run in the family?" "Huh? What?" "Nothing," said Matt, smiling to himself. They sat there sipping their smoothies in silence for a while. Matt, deciding he could contain it, no longer burst out. "So you know how I've been telling you that things between me and Jenny haven't been going so smoothly?" he said. "Well, the other day I was at a party with her. One of her friends, Kate, was hosting and we were together for the first half the party. But then as the party progressed into the night, we kinda got separated. I think I saw her in the kitchen getting some cake for the guests and talking to Kate, but I was too busy trying to beat this dude at Halo." "Yeah," he continued. "I know I am not that into video games, but it was a challenge and I was gonna get 2,000 bucks if I could beat him, because he was like this video game god or something. I lost, but then I got a glimpse of Jen having an extremely animated conversation with this dude, Jared. It got me thinking, Jen and I haven't spent much time together lately. I mean, you remember, don't you? There wasn't a time of the day when the two of us weren't texting. Now it's just a good morning and a good night. I seriously think we're falling apart." "Dude," said Chuck, "ever wondered what it would be like if they modeled a football stadium shaped like this glass? That would be bizarre, but I think it would be pretty cool too. I mean, it would definitely be an engineering marvel." "Were you even listening to what I was saying?" "Oh, sorry. You were saying something?" Matt stared at Chuck as if he were something particularly unpleasant. "How the hell did you get a girl like Rachel to ever date you?" "Oh well," smiled Chuck. "I'd have to say it's my attractiveness and masculine charm." "There's a spider on the wall behind you," said Matt flatly. But before he had even completed the sentence, Chuck had leapt off the chair, screaming like a frightened little girl who had lost her mommy. Masculine charm? Yeah, right, sniggered Matt. Hey, that doesn't mean anything. Matt did an impossibly accurate impression of Dr. Evil saying right in the Austin Powers series. Chuck took up the seat away from the wall. His phone rang, and he found the chief on the other side who inquired him about the progress of the investigation. Chuck recited the details of the crime and suspects. Well, we found some evidence and have made a profile of the killer, said he. I'd have to say it could be a female, sir. Yes, sir, I understand, sir, now sounding agitated. But we're gonna need a little more time. We don't have the luxury of time. Spaulding! The unmistakable yell of the chief was clearly heard even by Matt, who was at least a few feet away. Get your butt back to work. Yes, sir, said Chuck automatically. We will work faster. You have my word, sir. We will have a report for you soon. Chuck sighed and cuts the line. Chief seems to be in a good mood, said Matt, sarcastically. I'll say. What seems to be the problem? Chuck started to describe, very animatedly, how the press seemed to be on the mayor's butt, as a result of that the mayor was on the chief's butts, thus the chief was on their butts, and finally he concluded that they'd better be on someone else's but soon, or they were gonna be at the receiving end of some serious but whooping. So no pressure at all, huh? Said Matt, quite unconcerned as he knew that this was the natural order of police work. Not to mention he was also quite distracted by the thought of his girlfriend of 3 years cheating on him with Jared, who in his opinion wasn't even good looking. The bloody pinhead idiot. He weighed his options for some time, steadily growing moodier by the second. Chuck had noticed Matt's decline in spirits and had decided to drag him out of his misery. A rare occasion that indicated that Chuck was actually capable of showing and/or understanding human emotions. Why don't we come up with a list of suspects? Huh, said Matt as if he were waking from an eternal sleep. Oh yeah, good idea. So what have we got? Okay, said Matt, stepping back to reality and looking alert. So we know that the murder happened around 12 midnight. And we know that the bullet that killed Scaglietti was a .45 caliber, added Chuck impressively. Yes, and that doesn't help us at all considering it's very common, rejected Matt. And we found a rare lipstick roll at the scene of the crime, said Chuck. The only two people who actually own a roll of that particular lipstick were Rachel Grant and Sarah Burnley, which gives us two suspects but nothing solid to tie either of them to the crime. Not to mention that Rachel has an alibi, warned Chuck, who was beginning to have second thoughts about Rachel being guilty. So she says she could be lying, so that still makes her a suspect. Scaglietti's house was a mess, but nothing seems to be missing, indicating that the killer was indeed looking for something. Right? Said Matt, snapping his fingers. So that crosses out the possibility of this being an ordinary robbery and Scaglietti just got in the way. And what if the killer never really found what they were looking for? It's possible. We should head back to the lab later and see if they got anything else from the crime scene. From the information we collected about Scaglietti, we know that she had a maid do all the chores, which means she's also a suspect. But we don't have anything against the maid on this. I sent a guy from the department to her house to question her about it, so we should have something on her soon, said Chuck. Matt told Chuck that by now they had 3 suspects. We couldn't find evidence that the lipstick belonged to the killer, so it could have been Ms. Scaglietti's, theorized Chuck. Matt, however, had done some research on his part and had unearthed that Amy Scaglietti wasn't very keen on cosmetics. Chuck said that Matt was repeating what he said earlier, but Matt was prepared for this. Bear with me, said he, and continued to explain that he had come to his theory thus. She doesn't use makeup of any kind in all her reports or even in high society parties. I've checked this with Lipstick Guy, and he reckons this might not belong to her as she hadn't even touched it. I've checked for fingerprints, DNA, the whole 9 yards. Chuck had no other option but to accept that the lipstick had indeed not belonged to the victim. Matt continued and supported Chuck's notion that the murderer was a female due to the simple fact that they may have carried lipstick with them. That's still not much to work with, said Chuck. But it'll have to do. I am gonna visit Sarah again, said Matt. You go to the crime scene and see if you can find out what telltale Gale was talking about. Got it. We'll meet back at the station in 2 hours. Okay, I'll see you then. Matt stood up, fist bumped Chuck and left. Chuck, however, sat there, apparently deep in thought. No sooner had Matt moved a few paces away, he heard Chuck say, "Could you have really done this, Ratch?" He felt a rush of sympathy for Chuck, for he alone knew why Chuck had become so emotionally distant from other people. 4 years ago, Chuck had seen Rachel for the first time and immediately fallen desperately in love with her, not knowing her dark side. He had acquainted her, and they had grown quite close, and 6 months after Chuck first saw her having a smoothie at this very bar, he had popped the question and they had started dating exclusively. The years passed and they had become inseparable, thick as thieves. But Chuck hadn't known that half of them was really a thief. Life went on, and she had taken him to visit her grandfather, whom she loved like a little girl. An episode from which Chuck barely escaped with his life. But a year ago, when he asked Rachel to marry him, she left him. Merely hours later, Chuck was arrested for a crime he had never committed. He then realized that Rachel had been using him. If all had gone to plan, Chuck would have been sent to prison for a lifetime. But his proposal had caught her off guard, and she had been distracted that night and had narrowly escaped. When Chuck was brought in, Matt was assigned to take notes during the interrogation, but he saw that Chuck wasn't criminal material. The fact that he was crying his eyes out for a whole week might have helped him come to that conclusion, and Matt tirelessly worked and finally proved Chuck's innocence, and the real criminal was still at large. The two of them had become friends, and Matt suggested that Chuck join the Interpol. Absent-mindedly, Matt, gliding along memory lane, had walked past his destination. He was greeted shortly after his knock by a pleasantly surprised Miss Burnley. "Agent Matthew," she said warmly. "What a pleasant surprise. Can I help you with something?" "Good evening, Miss Burnley, and as a matter of fact you can," said he. "May I come in?" "Oh, where are my manners?" said she, and graciously invited him in. Matt replied his thanks and sat himself in the love seat, a personal favorite. He beat around the bush for a while by talking about the weather. Lame. But then he geared up and got down to matters at hand. "Now, Miss Burnley, I know that this might come as a little bit of a shock to you, but I need you to understand that this is a murder and we must assume anyone can be a suspect. That being said, I am not implying that you did it, but I must verify every loose end. I hope you understand." "Yes, Matthew, I do. Please, just call me Matt." And she nodded her agreement and likewise asked him to say Sarah. "Are you familiar with this model of lipstick?" He showed her the small roll of lipstick. "Yeah, I have one just like that. Well, mine's number 24. "Really?" "Yeah, it's supposed to taste different. There are 10 of different flavors. You know, like 20 to 29 are the same color, but they taste different. Then the next set is a different shade of the same flavors. I am a collector, you see, and I got mine from Amy, in fact." "So you have no relation to this one here?" He indicates to the one he had brought along. "No, they are incredibly rare, you see. I am lucky just to have one. And just so you know, I have a permit for the one I own." "A permit?" repeated Matt, baffled. Also slightly amused at the idea of a legal document for a lipstick. "Yes, as I said, I got mine from Amy, and she being a high-ranking news reporter has its perks. I can show it to you if you'd like." "That won't be necessary, Sarah," said Matt, convinced. They talked about the investigation and Matt filled her in on everything he thought was okay to let out. That turned out to be much less than what he had anticipated, so they moved on to talk about general everyday life. When she told him that she absolutely loved the lime with Sprite, he started to notice how most of his interests were mutual. A little while later, Matt's phone rang. Seeing that the coroner was calling him, he figured he should take the call. "Excuse me, I have to take this," said he. "Hello?" "Ah," exclaimed the doctor, "Agent Matthews. The DNA samples you sent me were an exact match." "Oh, that's great. But do me a favor, and don't tell anyone about it just yet." "Sure. May I ask why?" "It's just that I want to confirm a few things first." "All right then. Take care of yourself, Matt." "I will, Doc, later." And he pocketed his phone. "I am sorry," he apologized. "I had to take that." He looked at her, and when they made eye contact, she quickly looked away. "No, not at all," squeaked Sarah. She stared at the floor for a few seconds. Can I get you a drink?" "Oh, thank you. But no," said Matt, feeling strangely warm inside at this offer. "I have to be going now." "Oh," said she, disappointed, brushing a strand of her hair off her face. "Well, if there is anything else I can do." "Of course, Sarah," said Matt. As he stood up, he found himself admiring her figure. Her sleek, beautiful hair falling gracefully over her shoulders, the curve of her hips and those captivatingly deep black eyes shimmering like two bottomless pools of, "Oi, what the hell do you think you're doing?" screamed a little voice in his head. He shook his head, desperately trying to shake away his thoughts, but gave up as her warmth flooded over him as she shook his hand. He said goodbye to Sarah and almost walked straight into a bus as he crossed the road. Meanwhile, Chuck entered the deceased Miss Scaglietti's room to find a couple of people working there. He observed the activities of the people and randomly walked up to the nearest person. "Hey Haley, how goes the search?" "Hey Chuck, I am glad you're here. I think we found something." "Music to my ears, Haley. What did you find?" Haley went on to explain how he had noted that when he was examining the bedroom for prints, the bed seemed untouched. It alone had been disregarded by the assailant. So he reckoned the killer probably decided it was highly unlikely anything was hidden in it. He, however, had a nagging feeling and decided otherwise and found out moments later he was right. And lo and behold, cried Haley, I found a hidden memory card for some kind of electronic device. A device, you say? Said Chuck. Like a camera? Yeah, said Haley. Or a mobile phone or a laptop computer. Possibly an MP3 player or even a video game console such as the PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 1 has memory cards too, but they are obsolete. That's great, man, interrupted Chuck. Did you check what's in it? Well, I gave it over to Carl to check it out, along with Ms. Scaglietti's laptop. Fantastic. Thanks. Oh, by the way, did you happen to get anything on the maid? She didn't do it. How do you know? Because she's been in the wacky shack for the last 3 months, because apparently she thinks she's Princess Guinevere. Guinevere from King Arthur? The very same. Okay, said Chuck, in his usual monotonous tone. That rules her out as a suspect. He left Haley to join up with Carl, their techno-man. Howdy, Carl. But Carl didn't seem to have heard the newcomer. He was staring at the screen of his laptop as if his life depended on it. Oi, Carl. Still, no response. Hey, Carl, shouted Chuck right in his ear. Well, what? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there. Chuck, who didn't take not being noticed well, made a rude hand gesture. Really? He said sarcastically. This appeared to have helped him because he looked quite normal after that. Yeah. So what can I do for you? Asked Carl. Chuck suggested that he showed him what was in the memory card they found. Yeah, said Carl. About that? What? Said Chuck, annoyed at the thought that something had gone wrong. Then Carl told him that there was something fishy going on because the video they downloaded from the memory card had a 10-minute clip missing. The clock in the video verified this as it skipped 10 minutes. This new information caused Chuck's expression to change from annoyance to sheer eager curiosity, faster than a plasma-powered horse. Yeah, said Carl, seeing the look on Chuck's face. So I figured since that bit's not on the memory card, it's in the computer. And? Said Chuck, practically shaking with excitement. And nothing, said Carl. Yes, screamed Chuck before his mind actually deciphered the meaning of the words. Wait, what? I've checked everything, said Carl. She hadn't used her laptop for days, except once when she visited YouTube. You've got to be kidding me, breathed Chuck, looking crestfallen. So do we know if the killer got the data or what? I don't think the killer got it, because then she'd have taken off with the card. I mean, why leave it? And besides, the bed was untouched. Almost like it didn't even occur to them to search there. So we can safely assume that the killer doesn't have it, said Chuck. And I bet Miss Scaglietti's the one who hid it. Keep looking, it's got to be there somewhere. You got it. Hey Chuck, hey Carl, how goes the investigation? Asked Matt, who had just entered the room and walked over to check up on Chuck. We got nothing, said a disappointed Chuck, and seeing the dazed expression Matt was wearing. You in love or something? Yeah, me too, said Matt, and then he screwed up his face in concentration trying to remember what they had been talking about a second ago. I mean, about not getting anything. Hey Carl, can you do me a favor and look up a person called Alice Longworth and give me a report on anything you find out by tomorrow? Sure thing. I'll leave it on the desk with the other case files, all right? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, said Chuck, yawning and stretching. I say we head home for a well-earned rest and continue this in the morning. Best idea you've ever had, agreed Matt, fighting back a yawn of his own, but finally giving in. Wait, can you do that? Asked Carl. Sure we can. The lead investigators have certain privileges, Carl, said Chuck proudly. But if the chief asks, we are working hard and are unreachable at the moment. Got it? Whispered Matt. Yeah, chortled Carl. So what did you find out from Miss Burnley? He told him everything that he found out from her, but not quite. He decided it was best to keep some parts to himself. Sarah? Asked Chuck, raising an eyebrow. Since when did you get on first-name terms with her? Matt suddenly became very interested in a small scratch mark on his phone. We find our two friends in their room. Chuck was browsing YouTube videos and occasionally laughing gleefully. Matt was performing his usual Sunday morning ritual of styling his hair for half an hour. Both of them enjoying their silent company when Matt decided to break the peaceful silence by singing Your Guardian Angel by the Red Jumpsuit Apparatus. Seasons are changing and waves are crashing and stars are falling all for us. Oh no, said Chuck, and he pulled out a pair of earphones. I will never let you fall. I'll stand up for you forever. I'll be there for you through it all. Even if saving you sends me to heaven. 'Cause you're my true love. My whole heart. please don't throw that away. 'Cause I am here. For you. Please don't walk away and please tell me you'll stay. Will stay away, will. Use me as you will. Pull my strings just for a thrill. And I know I'll be okay. Though my skies are turning gray. I will never let you. Can you please just shut up? And Matt piped down, feeling guilty. He had been dreaming about Sarah. The silence returned after Chuck had insulted Matt, singing to his heart's content. Several long minutes later, Matt broke the silence, but this time not with song. You know, Chuck, I've been thinking and I reckon I should break up with Jenny. Yeah, and why is that? Asked Chuck automatically. I mean, I don't think I am getting the love and affection a guy needs in a relationship, droned Matt. Chuck, who hadn't really been paying attention, began to type very fast. And obviously she seems more interested in going to parties and flirting with other guys than spending time with me, finished Matt like a child deprived of his favorite chocolate. Chuck made a small noise, still paying his undivided attention to what he was watching. So I think I am gonna end it this Saturday, said Matt. That's great, Matt. I am so proud of you, said Chuck happily. Damn, you should see this video. It's out of the world. I don't know why I even bother, muttered Matt. Did the night inspire any ideas as to where she could have hidden that video? Sorry to disappoint, but the only thing the night inspired was a strong need to pee. I am serious. So was I, said Chuck, bowing his head. But where could she have hidden that video? Since it's a video, why don't you do what you always do and check YouTube? Joked Matt, amusing himself. But his smile faded when he saw the expression Chuck was wearing. He looked as if he had seen a man trying to wire a plug while juggling penguins, while making love to a beautiful woman, while on fire on stage in front of the Queen. Mate, Matt snapped his fingers in front of Chuck's face. You still with me? I just remembered. He stood up, then grabbed Matt by the head and shook him so violently that Matt thought his head would surely come off. Carl said she visited YouTube. No, said Matt, sarcastically as he tried to focus on the room again. But then he realized what a miserable little idiot he was being. For a little-known fact about Miss Scaglietti was that she was a YouTube freak. It was an excellent hiding place. No one would suspect it. As if by instinct, they both ran to the door at the same time, but in their attempt to get through it before the other, rather than go through the door, both of them hit the wall, hard, and collapsed, swearing. Matt rang up Carl when they had reached the office. Hey Carl, can you hack into Amy's YouTube accounts, preferably her private ones, and see if you can find the missing clip of the Citibank archives? Hey man, I am the best at what I do, he said proudly, but it might take a while. Right, but I need it, SCP. Gotcha. I'll be on it like a bonnet. Thanks, Carl, said he as he hung up. All right, we should have something soon, I hope. Meanwhile, let's put together what we got so far. Chuck nodded and began to read an extract from the file that Carl had left, but immediately staggered. This is impossible, he remarked. What is it? Our missing person, Alice Longworth, does not exist. Really? Said Matt, suddenly smugness painted upon his face. Looks like Rachel Grant was trying to send us on a wild goose chase. But it doesn't matter though, because I know she's the killer. Whoa, that's one hell of an accusation there. Have you got proof to back it up? If I didn't, I wouldn't be accusing her, said Matt, imitating Sherlock Holmes with an invisible pipe. Would I, my dear Watson? Check this out. The lipstick places her at the crime scene. We don't know if the lipstick really does belong to her. Matt pulled up the doctor's report. The DNA sample was an impeccable match with that of Rachel's, said Matt. All right, but that still doesn't mean she did it. All right, fair enough, agreed Matt, but he wasn't finished. But the house was wrecked, meaning that the killer was definitely looking for something. Chuck remained silent. And we know that a file was stolen from Citibank, and that Amy Scaglietti may have got a video of whoever did it. Right, but we don't know if that was Rachel. We will soon enough, but that's not all. Rachel's father is ex-special forces, and so is her grandfather. I think you remember, said he, lifting an eyebrow. Chuck shivered as a chill swept through his body. And we know that Rachel takes up after her father's side. So it would be no trouble at all for Rachel to have shot Miss Scaglietti from where she stood, continued Matt. Think about it, Chuck. She had a motive. She has the skills. She even lied to us about Alice Longworth to try and buy her more time, reasoned Matt. Well done, detective. I am impressed. Chief, said Matt, turning around. If we recover that video, and if what you say is true, then there is no doubt that Rachel Grant is the perpetrator. Chuck pleaded that it didn't make any sense at all. How could she have known about the video? He implored. She's a professional criminal. Do you really think she wouldn't have figured it out somehow? But Chuck wasn't ready to accept reason. He argued that the facts didn't add up to Rachel. He argued that Rachel had been in England at the time of the murder, but Matt had checked on that. There hadn't been any record of her going there recently. No flight records, nothing. She wouldn't kill someone over a stupid little video, he begged. Spaulding, you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. No, I am not, he spat. See, if she did it, why would she use a .45 caliber? I know that the only gun she possesses was her father's .357 Magnum, which she's used as her trademark. You yourself gave me that bit of information, Matt. You said that she only ever used that. Why would she use anything else? Obviously, she's smarter than using a weapon we could easily trace back to her for murder. If you want to prove her innocence, then you're going to have to give something more solid than that. Spaulding. Rachel is an impeccable shot, sir. There's no way she could have been off by as much as a millimeter from that range, let alone an inch. Circumstantial, Spaulding. Evidence like that won't last in court. But sir, pleaded Chuck, but the chief cut him. But nothing. When the video comes in and it is what Matt says it would be, then bring it to my office, said the chief, and without so much as another word, he left. Chuck turned on Matt. Come on, Matt. You know I am right. I am sorry, Chuck, but this time you're just not looking at the evidence. I know it looks bad, but that doesn't mean she did it. Look, I know you two shared something special in the past, but that all over now. She's changed, mate, said Matt. He couldn't believe he was saying it, but it was worth it if it would knock some sense into Chuck. I'd have thought you'd realize that the day she left you next to nothing. He felt horrible. Chuck looked as if he'd just had his heart ripped out again. He blinked. It dawned on Matt that Chuck had never really given up on her. He just stood there, flabbergasted, looking at the floor. Finally, he looked up. This isn't about us. This is about convicting someone for something they didn't do. His voice cracked, and his throat sounded dry. Matt's phone rang. Okay, we can see for ourselves then, he answered and put it on speaker. Carl? I've sent the video to your computer. I think you're gonna want to see this. Okay, thanks, Carl, said Matt. Picking up the laptop, he tried to locate the video. It's in the main server, in your shared folder. Passwords 23,344, said Carl. After locating the file, Matt punched in the password and played it. It showed the Citibank manager's office. It was nighttime, but the moonlit office was clearly visible. Someone entered the office and opened the filing cabinet. The intruder's figure suggested that of a woman's. As she turned, the video paused. Rachel Grant's face was clearly recognizable. I rest my case, said Matt. Chuck stared at the screen, horrified. Not enough, said he. Carl, run an infinity scan on her. Thought you might come up with that, said Carl. Already did, and it didn't take much time either. Rachel Grant was the one who did it. Matt hung up and looked at Chuck. All right, so maybe she stole the file, but that doesn't mean she murdered Scaglietti, said Chuck, desperately. Do you even hear yourself? Look at the evidence. She is the only one who could have done this, getting slightly annoyed at Chuck's failure to see reason. But we don't have solid enough proof to convict her. And what proof do you have that shows she didn't do it? I know her, Matt. She didn't do this. Oh, right. You know her? Asked Matt, growing angry. You don't know her at all. You still have this beautiful image of her. What did she do when you proposed? She left. She left. And you were arrested for what she did. She just used you. You were just a random actor in her play. She doesn't care about you. And yet here you are, 12 months later, thinking she loved you. That's not what I am saying. Then what are you saying, Chuck? Said Matt, raising his voice still. Heads were turning in their direction, but he didn't care. That we should just take it easy and let it go because you still love her? Is that it? Wake up and face the truth. You and Rachel will never be together. Do you think that she'll come running to if you save her from jail? And if you're blindly gonna risk everything that we worked for, then maybe you shouldn't be here. What? What are you saying? That I don't deserve to be a detective? That's exactly what I am saying. No, said Chuck, bitterness swooping over his face. No, I don't deserve to have a bone-headed friend like you. Matt said nothing as Chuck turned away from him and put some distance between them. He looked back. Criminals may be scum, but at least they stick together. Chuck left without another word. Yeah? Well, good riddance, shouted Matt after Chuck. He sat down on his desk and sighed, ran his fingers through his hair and stared into oblivion. Everything was so quiet. Everyone had gone back to their work, but he knew they were secretly talking about them. He didn't care. He put his back against the wall and put his head between his knees. He felt sick. They had been everybody's idea of best friends, in and out of the office until now. Until Matt had run through Chuck's heart with a knife. He couldn't believe what he said. How could he have said that to his best friend? But Chuck had been blinded by love. He hadn't seen the truth that was plainly dancing naked in front of him. The stupid git. He heaved himself off the desk, picked up the file and his laptop, and dragged himself into the chief's office. He showed the chief everything. His actions were lifeless, zombie-like. He felt as though he had a part of him missing. "Excellent, we have her," exclaimed the chief. "I am gonna get a warrant for her arrest, but it will take about 3 days." Matt didn't say anything. He just stared out the window, an empty, sinking feeling inside him. "I am going to let you lead the arrest." "Well done, detective. Keep this up and someday you might be as good as me." "Thank you, sir," said Matt, emptily. "Don't worry about him, son. He'll come back." Matt stared at the chief as he patted him on the shoulder and asked him to go home. He turned and walked back to his desk where he sat down and watched the comings and goings of the office, though his mind didn't register any of this. Chuck sat alone in their smoothie bar, the very same one he and Matt had hung out at hundreds of times. He ordered a mango marvel, but even its incredible powers of washing away virtually anything seemed to be absent now that Matt wasn't by his side. He thought of all the times the two of them had been here, all their silly little arguments, and the time that they'd won a coupon for a year's supply of free smoothies. When Matt had finally picked up the courage to ask Jen out, and she said yes, they'd celebrated all night and had been sick for an entire week afterwards. All those happy memories seemed stolen, stale, and above all replaced by what Matt said. He got up and left his unfinished drink on the counter, an act that both of them believed to be a most heinous crime, and walked out into the street. He wasn't paying attention to where his feet were carrying him. He just kept walking. For what felt like hours, he traced the roads, and as the evening stretched out, his legs felt numb. He leant on a wall of a handsome-looking shop to have a breather. Passers-by, he could see, dudes, friends, brothers. He felt painfully alone. Everywhere he looked, kids were playing catch with their friends, guys walking by, hitting each other playfully, 2 old men in their late 70s enjoying a cup of tea in a restaurant. Feeling he'd seen enough, and with the night creeping up, he began walking back to his apartment. It felt wrong to go there. He had shared with Matt for over 6 months. He had occasionally used his place instead of Matt's as a crib, but now that he felt like this might be the end, he kept walking with his hands in his pockets and his head bowed in an attempt to shut out the outside world. He staggered to a halt before a restaurant that he and Matt had once been chucked out of. It triggered a memory. Matt had been watching a TV show called Top Gear, and that was all he could talk of. He was obsessed. One day after a long morning, they decided to treat themselves to a decent meal and had chosen this place. Despite the waiter's warning to keep their voices down, Matt had yapped on about Top Gear until he'd driven Chuck insane. Chuck finally asked him to drop it, but he had said it too loud. The waiter had kindly asked the 2 idiots to leave, but being the idiots they were, they immediately started bickering about who was a bigger idiot until a huge security man had grabbed both of them by their collars and thrown them out. Just 2 tables away from where they had had their little fiasco, Matt was now thinking about the same thing. The cursor in the report he was typing blinked expectantly but had moved nowhere in the last 10 minutes. He looked at what he had written, reread it, but what he wrote barely a quarter of an hour ago didn't make sense. Swearing loudly, he got up. The waiter shot him a warning look, but he didn't care. Matt returned to his seat after splashing his face with cool water. He was able to finish the report, but only just. 15 minutes later, he was handing over the report to the chief, who praised him for his outstanding work. But in Matt's mind, he couldn't help but wonder, what if Chuck was right? What if Chuck knew what he was talking about for once? The chief brought him out of his thoughts as he realized that he had been staring at the waste paper basket for quite some time. He left the office and took a cab home. Street lights and shops reflected in the window as the car sped on towards his house, and he was looking at himself, not sad and beat down as he was now, but happy and laughing. In the reflection, Chuck was by his side. He was pointing at a kiddie pool through the window of a shop. The joy of a child painted on his face as he relayed the possibilities to an amused Matt. But as abruptly as it had appeared, the car turned and all that remained was black. That night he was restless, and as he tossed and turned in bed, he received a call from Jen. Hearing her voice was comforting, and they kept talking. He told her how they'd been drifting apart, but he received another painful blow as she said she'd found someone else and wanted to break up with him. When Matt finally ended the call, he was devastated, but as the night wore on, sleep finally overtook him. He just sat there, in the smoothie bar. Everything was a blur. The chairs, people, and the drinks. Everything except for the glass he was holding. It had a thin strip of black reflected in it. It was waving as though it was riding the wind, and strangely, it reminded him of the person Rachel had been talking to when they found her. She had had sleek black hair. This triggered a series of questions. Why would Rachel kill someone over a measly video? She'd shot before, but always avoided, if possible. She'd never killed before, so why start now? She was an excellent thief, so how come she didn't find the memory card? She was also a top marksman. Why miss the target? The 1973 Ruger Vaquero single-shot .347 Magnum revolver was her trademark. Why use another? Matt opened his eyes and slowly sat up in bed. He wasn't sleepy anymore. He couldn't help but think that the dream had made sense. He stayed there in the dark for hours, analyzing every possible scenario, until at last, at daybreak, he had the answer. He jumped out of bed to wake Chuck, but he wasn't there. He grabbed his phone and called him. No answer. Matt quickly typed a text message. Hey Chuck, I'm sorry about what I said earlier and I think you may be right. I am going to check Rachel's apartment. I think the real killer is going to frame Rachel by placing the murder weapon there. And I think I know who it is. Matt entered Rachel's apartment, mildly surprised that he'd managed it without difficulty. He'd found out Rachel was gone for the day and would not coming back till later that night from the friendly security guard. He walked in slowly, carefully, verifying that he was alone. He closed the door, but didn't lock it in case he had to make a quick getaway. It seemed stupid, but it was a plan of action that had never failed him. He cautiously swept the entire apartment and decided to take a closer look at Rachel's room. Halfway down the corridor, though, he heard a creak and looked around, but something caught him squarely on his face. His nose had broken. Pain erupted from his forehead, and he saw little lights explode in his vision, and as he staggered, everything went black. A bolt of pain searing through his head indicated he was still alive. He opened his eyes. Bound to a chair, he was unable to move anything except his head, which now felt heavy. He looked around. There was a candle suspended above his head, its wax falling on him, hot, but he wasn't in immediate danger. Or at least he thought he wasn't. He felt wet. Someone had splashed water on him, but he doubted whether it was water at all. It felt strangely oily. It was a few more minutes before his sense of smell returned to him. Now though, the innocent little candle didn't look innocent at all, for he recognized what he had been splashed with. Petrol. The string suspending the candle above him was tied to a small but heavy metal box placed on top of a desk. Inside the metal box, there was another candle placed directly above the string. The box too was filled with petrol, and when the candle got short enough, it would burn the string holding the former candle. The candle would fall, setting Matt on fire. He tried to move the chair, but it was stuck. Panic-stricken, he decided it was best to do what everybody else does, shout. But the assailant had seen to that as well. There was a piece of duct tape over his mouth. Regardless of the gravity of the situation, he felt a sudden urge to laugh at the irony. How had he not been aware that his own mouth was taped shut? He looked at the candle on the desk. Any second now it would touch the waiting petrol. Then everything happened all at once. The flame cracked, exploding the little box. Something crashed onto him from behind, pushing him forwards and away from the deadly candle. Fire erupted where he had been mere seconds ago. "Man, am I glad to see you," screamed Matt. "I got your message and thought you might need a little help," said Chuck. He was smiling, using a fire extinguisher to put the flames out. "Well, you thought right. I think the killer knocked me out and tried to kill me. He almost succeeded." "I hate to say I told you so," said Chuck, "but I think you've got something to say to me." "All right," said Matt, as Chuck freed his hands and began to untie his legs. "I admitted I was being small-minded. And I am sorry I said the things I said. And you deserve to be a detective just as much as I do. Maybe even more. And I was a blithering idiot." "Okay, now that makes it a bit complicated, because I was going to make a buzzer sound and say you're wrong," said Chuck. "But that works too. Anyway, I was going to say, let's go catch that killer." "I missed you, man," said Matt. "I missed you too, mate." "Oh, and one more thing," said Matt and slapped Chuck as hard as he could in the face. "What was that for?" cried Chuck. "For trying to act cool and waiting until the last minute to save me. But you've got to admit it was cool." "Yeah, okay, let's go catch ourselves a killer." "Yes," said Chuck, triumphantly. "But first, more importantly, let's go get a smoothie." "Hell yeah." "When did you come to your senses?" asked Chuck, sipping his favorite, the Mango Marvel, which had had all its powers returned. Matt took a swig and started to give the details of his dream and the questions that had formed in his head. He explained how he had weighed out the scenarios and had no choice but to accept Chuck's story. "How the hell did you accomplish all that in a dream?" asked the bewildered Chuck. "The inner mechanisms of my mind," said Matt, and he paused for dramatic effect. are an enigma. Is actually another way of saying I happen to be crazy, said Chuck, a matter-of-factly. The point is, I reckon you were right. This isn't Rachel's style, and if you really look at it, the evidence doesn't add up. Alright, now that we've established that, what is the plan of action? Now we move in for the kill. And you have a plan to do all this? The tone suggested that Chuck seriously doubted Matt's abilities. Chuck, who am I? Asked Matt smugly. Pirates of the Caribbean. At World's End when Jack was talking to Beckett, said Chuck, and seeing the look Matt was giving him, okay, fine, I'll do it. Chuck pretended to be confused. I, said Matt, am Sebastian Matthew DeRosier III. All right, Sebastian Matthew DeRosier III. What's your grand scheme to apprehend our elusive friend? Glad you asked. Since the investigation is ongoing, we cannot reveal much, but I will say that a witness has come forth and is willing to testify against the murderer, but as the killer is still out there, we cannot disclose any information about the witness. All we can say is that the witness had acquired photographic evidence of the murderer. As soon as the witness comes forth and testifies, this individual will be placed under 24-hour witness protection. No further comments, said the chief on national television. Matt closed the live broadcast on his phone, and after pocketing it, he knocked on Sarah's front door, which swung open rather quickly. Good morning, Sarah, said Matt. I hope I am not interrupting. Oh, Matt, she said, staring at him in mild surprise. Oh no, of course not. Please, do come in. Have a seat. Thank you, said Matt as he entered. I see you've heard the latest development. Matt gestured to the television, which was showing the news. So is it really true? She asked as they sat down on the couch. Is there really a witness who saw the murderer? Oh yes, he says he even has a photo of the killer. Seems he is a paparazzi photographer and was trying to capture a nighttime picture. A photo? Repeated Sarah. Now that should definitely help you catch this killer, I hope. Well, maybe. I mean, we first have to identify who the person in the photo is, and besides, we don't exactly know who this witness is or even if he's telling the truth. We only managed to reach him and convince him to testify because of another criminal we interrogated recently. Oh, another criminal? Matt told her about Rachel Grant, how she was a professional thief and how she had been originally accused of being the murderer. However, he explained, we figured out that it was someone else. And since during the interrogation she had mentioned that she thought she had a pretty good idea who the real killer was, we, my partner and I, tried to weed that information out of her. But her accusation was desperately unlikely. But then she said she knew this paparazzi guy. So we made a deal with her to let her go in exchange for giving us the information we need. Better yet, she said she'd present us with a witness with photographic evidence. Apparently, he was a personal friend of Rachel's. So she talked to him and arranged a meeting at the abandoned parking lot behind the hill at 1 o'clock tonight. But realizing had said too much, he added, "Oh, but I've said too much. It'd best if you keep this to yourself, Sarah." "Oh, yes, of course," she said. "So, only this Rachel person knows the whereabouts of the witness?" asked Sarah. "Afraid so. But don't you worry, we are pretty sure she's not lying because she'd be convicted if he didn't turn up." He then changed the topic of the conversation by asking her how she was coping, and they kept talking for a long time, and she told him how they had been friends since college, but as she kept talking about Amy, she finally lost her grip and started to cry. Matt moved over to her side and comforted her, and she rested her head on his shoulder, and Matt wrapped his arm around her. He thought of Jen, how she had never really expressed herself to him, but he loved her, and once upon a time, so had she. The two of them sat together in their silent company, occasionally disturbed by a sniff from Ms. Burnley. He retracted his arm, and she stood up to go to the bathroom, and when she came back, Matt told her that it was time for him to leave. "Okay, and thank you for everything," said she. "Just doing my job, ma'am," said he, dramatically putting on the mysterious hat which had just appeared out of thin air. She was rattled by the sudden appearance of a hat, but thought the better of it and didn't question him. "If it wasn't for you, I would never be able to get over this," said she, and abruptly hugged him. They broke apart rather quickly, and she moved several paces back, blushing. "Goodbye, Miss Burnley," said Matt, smiling and tipping his hat. A hooded figure emerged out of a car and leant on it. It was a dark and silent car park. The surrounding trees whispered soundlessly to each other, and the hill casted a long, ghostly shadow over it. Nothing short of what was expected during the night, except for the unusual behavior of the man in the cloak, but he was not alone. A second person walked up to the former, appearing out of the shadows. The latter too was wearing a hooded cloak, but was shorter than the man leaning on the car and also thinner, with a build that of woman, but just as she had reached him, she pulled out a gun and pointed it right at the man's head. The man, however, remained calm, for unnoticed by the woman, he had backup. A second man crept up from behind the woman and pointed his gun at her head. "Drop it," said he. The woman hadn't expected this, and the moment she let her guard down, the man took the opportunity to wrestle the gun from her. The second man locked the woman's hands behind her back and held her steady. The first man reached out for the hood and removed it. "Sarah Burnley," said he, as he moved close to her until they were just inches apart and removed his own hood. "Surprised to see me?" asked Matt, coolly. Sarah gasped. Chuck rolled his eyes at Matt's behavior. "You thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" "Well, you don't mess with the law," said Matt. "Justice is a non-corrosive metal." "Hey, that's good. Where'd you get that from?" asked Chuck. "Megamind," said Matt, happily, and then resumed his act of being the cool detective. As he stared into those deeply gorgeous eyes, he noticed that Sarah was looking into his own, and hidden in the deep depths of those two desperately pretty black eyes, he saw relief. "Take her away," said Matt, confused, and as Chuck pushed her into the car, he stood there blindly gazing at a tree. "I'll never understand how a girl's mind works." The light was switched on in the interrogation room where Sarah was seated at one end of a long white desk. Matt assumed seat in front of her, and Chuck paced the floor. The silence was deafening, so at long last, Chuck broke it. "Okay, this silence is eerie," said he. "So why'd you do it?" asked Matt. Miss Burnley didn't appear to have heard him. "We know it was you," screamed Chuck. "How was that?" "It was good," smiled Matt. "Thanks." "Can't remember, eh?" asked Matt, turning his attention to Miss Burnley, who seemed to have lost her ability to talk. "Well, Chuck, I think we need to jog her memory." "Oh yeah," said Chuck in a very odd manner. "I love jogging memories." "What does that even mean?" asked Matt, utterly confused. "It's for effect," said Chuck. Apparently he thought that that was common knowledge. Matt rolled his eyes and rested them on Sarah. Yet again. "You wanted to kill Amy Scaglietti for days because you were the brains behind her success," said Matt. "You were the one who solved all the puzzles, the riddles, and you were the one who truly devised the plans to bust all the criminals. Yet she was the one who got all the credit. One day you decided enough is enough and plotted to kill her. You were just too smart to get caught. What could go wrong? How did you do it? You learned about Rachel Grant after Amy bought you the lipstick, and you posed as Alice Longworth. It wasn't hard for you to befriend Rachel," contributed Chuck. "You two are very much alike. You're smart, she likes what you like what she likes, and I like smoothies." Matt looked at him, perplexed. "Then," he continued, "you borrowed her lipstick and then fell off the grid. Not a difficult thing for you. After all, it was your previous job to help people disappear and start new lives." "And after that, Sarah," said Matt. Chuck looked at him from the corner of his eye. "You used an untraceable line to contact Rachel and hired her for a job and anonymously tipped of Amy about this theft. The unsuspecting Amy thought it a great idea to catch the infamous Rachel Grant on video," said Matt. "No doubt this would make her a legend among reporters. Regardless of her flaws, she was a skilled field reporter, so she was able to pull it off. But you knew that, didn't you? That she'd get it? So, shortly afterwards, you killed Amy and placed the lipstick you got from Rachel there as evidence, and wrecked the place to make it look like she was searching for the video. But of course you knew where the video was, so you didn't check the bed because you wanted us to be intrigued by its curious state so that we would eventually find the video and think that Rachel hadn't. Then you tipped off Rachel by telling her that there was a video, so she would behave a bit odd. After that," said Chuck, "all you needed to do was place the murder weapon in her apartment, and she would have gone to prison for the murder of Amy Scaglietti. You chose the day before yesterday to plant it considering the fact that Rachel wouldn't be home, but you never expected Agent Matt here to be at the apartment, so you, hastily, improvised. You incapacitated him and attempted to burn him along with the apartment and incriminate Rachel even further. Ingenious. The accused burns the accuser in her own apartment. Little did you know that by then, we had already figured out that Rachel didn't do it. You see, once upon a time Chuck and Rachel were as thick as thieves. And after we parted ways, so to speak, I went on to become a cop and specialized in criminal profiling. And in my eyes, the crime just didn't fit Rachel's profile because, for one thing, you used a .45 caliber gun, a Jericho 941F in this case. But Rachel only uses her father's 1973 Ruger Vaquero single-shot .347 Magnum revolver, sort of her trademark. All the big ones have it, you see. They don't want to lose the credit for something they did to someone else, do they? If you had done your research a little bit more thoroughly, said Matt, you would have figured that out. And secondly, she's an impeccable shot. I've never known her to miss her mark. Ever. Mostly though Rachel is a bit of a pacifist, so she don't kill. She just impediments them. Besides, Rachel is too good to get caught, which is what led me to suspect you. I mean, it's simple, really. You have the spare key to Amy's apartment. There were no signs of a break, and so obviously the assailant used a key. So we set a little trap for you, said Chuck. First, we got the chief to make a false statement about a witness to the murder. We knew you'd take the bait. When you heard news about a witness, you panicked. And when I turned up at your place, you were clearly surprised. And then, you confirmed with me if it was true, albeit you were pretending to be the grieving friend, worrying about the progress of the investigation of your dear friend's murder. And you did it very well. Unaware to you, Agent Matt here is an expert on body language. Well, he knows what he's doing, and was able to see through your deception. Deception, nice word, commented Matt. Thanks, I thought so too, whispered Chuck, then purposely began to reveal critical pieces of information about the case. Having majored in acting in college, in attempts to become an actor, Matt was too good for you to see his lie. After I told you that Rachel was the connection, you thought you could still get away with it because I said that she was under arrest until we got the information. And when Matt here accidentally gave you the time and date of the meeting, you decided to dispose of the witness so that Rachel would remain in prison. So, asked Matt, did we get everything? There was another long pause. Nobody spoke. Sarah appeared to be contemplating her options. Okay, I did it, said she, finally, but it wasn't because she was famous or anything. Then why? Asked Matt. It's because she never showed me any gratitude for anything. After everything I did for her, not even a thank you. You killed someone over a thank you? Cried Chuck. Sarah looked away. Matt frowned. I think we're done here. Maybe we'll see each other again, said Chuck, in a few decades, and he left the room, but Matt remained seated. She didn't speak, just sat there looking at her knees, her hands resting on her lap. Matt saw a tear roll down her face, but she made no attempt to hide it. As he looked at her, he felt an unconditional happiness inside. He stood up and walked over to her and slowly wiped her cheek with the back of his hand, and she turned to face him at his touch. Her eyes were red but no less mesmerizing, and as he looked at her, she stared back. Her bottom lip quivered and she dropped her gaze to the floor. Matt stood there next to her, her face just barely touching his hand. He could feel her heat radiating on his hand. He decided it was time to leave, and he gave her shoulder a small squeeze just before he started to walk away. I didn't want to hurt you, said she, in an almost inaudible whisper. I knew he'd save you. Matt stood there rooted to the spot. His brain had stopped working. He couldn't decide what to do. He just stood there watching her sobbing silently, wanting to reach out for her. He didn't know how long he stayed there, but as he watched her cry, no matter what she had said, he knew there was something more, something that she wasn't ready to let out. He regained control of his legs and walked out, and as he opened the door, she turned around to face him one last time, and he smiled at her and tipped his invisible hat. Goodbye, Miss Burnley, said he, softly, and amidst her tears, she smiled back, and Matt felt the strange warm sensation return to him as he closed the door. Chief, said he, automatically when he saw him standing next to Chuck. Boys, said the chief, clearly impressed, and he put his hands on their shoulders and spoke. You've really outdone yourselves this time. I never thought that you had this much potential, and I am terribly sorry for dismissing you earlier. Chuck, I was wrong. Water under the bridge, Chief, smiled Chuck. You boys are in for a promotion. Starting tomorrow, I want you to handle some very high-profile cases. Sir, yes, sir, said Matt and Chuck together, enthusiastically, but in Matt's point of view, this case was yet to be solved. You know, I've been thinking, said Chuck. They were back at their apartment, lying on their beds. Chuck was browsing Facebook and Matt was reading Lipstick District, and I've realized two things. Yeah? What? Asked Matt. First, and more importantly, said he, absolutely bursting with laughter, you got beat up by a girl. Chuck laughed as hard as he could at a flabbergasted Matt. What's the second? Asked Matt, frowning. We both fell in love with criminals. Matt looked at him, about to argue but realized there was no point in denying it. And as he looked out the window, he began to think about what had happened earlier. An eternity later, he looked at Chuck. I don't think we got it right, said Matt. Here we go, said Chuck. Matt thought about what he had seen that night when he looked at her in the car park. She didn't do it, said he. She pointed a gun at your head and tried to make barbecue out of you. Yeah, said Matt, and I am gonna find out who forced her to. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.